Hello and welcome to the programme which looks at the Holy Land. I am Paul Calvert. Psalm 90 verse 1 from the New King James Bible says this: Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. I'm with Justin Kron, producer of the October 7 Bearing Witness to a Massacre film. Why did you want to make this film, Justin?
Yeah, Paul, we made this film because we wanted to document history. Right after the events of October 7, we noticed immediately the level of denial that was coming from all corners of the world, or people distorting what had actually happened or characterizing what Hamas had done as just resistance as the result of 75 years of brutal occupation. We were startled, really. We saw from over 30 groups at Harvard University, they signed a joint statement that came out. It was before midnight of October 8th. So on October 7th, that very day, they came out with a statement that accused Israel for the unfolding violence that was happening, holding Israel responsible really for what Hamas had done to the Israelis and others who were killed and kidnapped. And so we had been in the process at that time of producing a follow-up docuseries to a previous award-winning film that we produced called Hope in the Holy Land, delving beneath the surface of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we knew immediately that we needed to pivot our plan on this docuseries to be able to cover the events of October 7. So we went back in May of 2024 to interview survivors, a former hostage, and historical experts. Because listen, many people had said that the events of October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum, and we would agree. However, the events that people were, those who were supporting Hamas, the events that they were stating was that Gaza had been under brutal occupation for 75 years. Well, listen, we know that Israel disengaged completely from Gaza in 2005. Removed its military. It's about 9,000 or so Israeli civilians completely disengaged from Gaza in 2005. And then what happened right after 2005? In fact, within 24 hours of Israel's disengagement in August of 2005, Hamas started firing rockets at Israeli civilians, which has continued for the last 18, 19 years. And there were Israelis who were killed and injured. Of course, Israel needed to protect its citizens. It needed to retaliate and do what any sovereign nation would do to protect its civilian population. And so there were several military operations that occurred. And sadly, of course, there were Gazan civilians who were killed in those military operations. But then what happened? Hamas would use that to make Israel look bad. They would, highlight how many of their civilians were being killed. And of course, you would have the media that would amplify that. And so steadily for 18 years, since 2005, and even beforehand, you had this constant demonization of Israel and delegitimization of Israel. And so here we get to the point where we are today, where you have millions around the world who project Israel as being the bully, the aggressor, when the fact of the matter is Israel's just trying to protect its citizens, protect itself, defend itself as any sovereign nation in the world would do under similar circumstances. As a reminder, I'm sure many of your listeners are very well aware of the fact that this is not just a conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Arabs who reside in the West Bank or in Gaza. This is a conflict between Israel and the wider Islamic world, including, of course, in the center of which is the Islamic regime in Iran, who funds organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, etc. So this is a much bigger war that's going on, and it's a war for Israel's survival. And so I think this is why we made the film, so that people could be truly educated about really what Israel is up against.
Who do you speak to in the film, and what are some of their stories?
Yeah, we speak with survivors. When we get to the section in the film that starts to cover the events of October 7th, we start with a couple of survivors from the Nova Music Festival who tell their stories. And we use their stories to tell the broader story of what happened there and the over 300 people, 350 or so people who were massacred by these terrorists. And And it's incredibly moving to hear their story. After we were done filming, I spoke with one of them, Eden is her name, and she had told me that she had recently met a Holocaust survivor there in Israel, and they had an immediate bond, an immediate connection. And I said, well, I know why you had that immediate connection is because you both faced the same type of enemy. I mean, this Holocaust survivor's enemy were known as the Nazis, and your enemy is, they're known as Hamas, but the reason for why they wanted to kill you was exactly the same. And it's just pure Jew hatred, a belief that Jews are really second class, third class. Really, the Jews should not even really exist. That it's very clear within the Hamas charter that their plan, which is inspired by their ideological beliefs within Islam, is that there is a day that is coming that all Jews will be wiped off the earth. And so this is why people like Eden and other survivors of October 7th have these connections with Holocaust survivors and others who've been attacked simply for being Jewish. There is a deep, deep Jew hatred problem within Islamic society that even goes beyond just terrorist organizations. I can say that because I've spent time with Palestinians interviewing them in the West Bank, in Judea, Samaria, and many of the same anti-Semitic tropes that have existed for centuries are sadly held by many of the Palestinian people. In our previous film, Hope in the Holy Land, you'll see a scene there where we are in Ramallah and walking down Main Street, and just for those who may not know, Ramallah is a middle to upper class Palestinian city. I mean, there are boutiques and cafes, there's malls, there's a Kentucky Fried Chicken on one side of the street and a Popeye's chicken on the other. So just to give you an idea of what Ramallah is like. And there was a bookseller who was selling books right there on the street. And lo and behold, right there, one of the books that he was selling was Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, right there in Arabic, as if it was any other book. And, try to imagine, those who are listening, wherever you live, just imagine seeing someone selling that book in your town. Imagine what kind of reaction there would be. Well, the reaction that we noticed from those passing by was nothing. It was like it was normal. And so sadly, this is the situation within Palestinian society, and it needs to be addressed. And this is what Israel is up against.
Now, you do have people today denying what happened. You actually use footage that Hamas filmed themselves, don't you?
Yeah, we do. I mean, Hamas captured much of what they did on October 7th. And it's very, very hard to describe. I mean, it's a massacre captured on film. And so our film does include some of that footage. We do blur out things that need to be blurred out and cut things where they need to be cut, just, so that there's not too much trauma for the audience. But I think it's important that people see what happened. Again, as mentioned, there was and continues to be denial regarding what happened, just as there's been denial about the Holocaust, even though the Holocaust is extremely well documented. But you have the Hamas terrorists and their sympathizers. And I say sympathizers because there were civilians who participated, Gazan civilians who participated in the events of October 7. And the world needs to know the truth. So that's what's captured in our film.
Was there a lot of footage from Hamas to go through? And how did you choose what went into the film?
Yeah, so Hamas had posted a lot of what they had done and live streamed what they had done on Telegram. And so that's the platform that we used primarily to get a lot of this footage. Some of the footage had become pretty, widely available through social media. So we used the footage that we thought was going to be most effective in conveying to the audience what occurred.
Was it difficult making this film?
Extremely difficult. I mean, there's moments where I had to unplug. Like I had to step away from it when we were going through footage, in a way not to lose, my heart in this, to not become callous to what it was that we were viewing. And just even when we were on site at the kibbutzim that had been attacked, the best way I can describe it is imagine being in Auschwitz or in the Warsaw Ghetto just months after it was in operation, and just trying to reconcile what had occurred, the barbarism, the brutality, the the horror that had occurred in the space that you're standing in. It was hard. So, yeah. But again, at the same time, I felt like we were doing God's work. I felt like what we were doing was sacred work, helping to tell the story and to preserve the memory of the lives that had been taken from us way too early. And so I think viewers, when they do watch October 7, I think they'll very much feel what it was like for us. And I would pray that nobody ever has to go through that again.
It must have been moving going down to actually going down to the massacre sites and the places where a lot of this was shot. Must be really quite moving, was it?
Yeah, I would say if, anyone who's been to, say, like Auschwitz or any of the Holocaust memorials in Europe, it feels very, very similar to that. And so I think it's important to bear witness, and as for us as followers of Jesus, to mourn with those who mourn, to weep with those who weep, to stand with those who are going through tremendous pain and loss and trauma. And, to understand too that, this is not an event that's like in the past, really. This is an ongoing trauma that is occurring, especially as we speak here together right now. Israel is under attack. There's Israeli civilians that are being killed. There's indiscriminate bombing, war crimes that are being committed by the Islamic regime in Iran. And so this is an ongoing war. For followers of Jesus, we are called to be peacemakers. And if you're going to be a peacemaker, you do not run away from the conflict, you run towards the conflict. You cannot be a peacemaker from the outside. You need to be a peacemaker from within. And so that's our attempt through this film and through sharing this film with others, so that even if they can't get on a plane and go and be with those who are in Israel, they could at least emotionally and in spirit be with them through understanding the tremendous loss that and pain that the Israelis have been experiencing now for the last year and a half.
Now, the film visits the home of the Bebas family. Was that emotional going there and filming there?
Very. At the time that we went, it was still not known as to whether or not the Bebases, Sherry and her two sons, and the father, if they were alive or dead. We didn't know. So there was still a lot of hope at that time that they were alive, that they would return. And so having that experience of standing in front of their home and then getting the news that they had been killed in captivity, the father was not, but Sherry and her boys was really hard to reconcile. I have to admit, I was extremely angry. I'm still angry about it. I mean, who does that? Who does that to her mother and her children? And then the way that their bodies were returned was it was such a spectacle. I mean, Hamas was so just brazen in their, how would you put it, just in how they felt, I guess, about these people celebrating really their deaths. There were women and children who were, I would call it just a carnival when their bodies were being returned to Israel, who were dancing and singing. I mean, even the Nazis never did that. So this is the level of just evil that we're dealing with. And it's very, very hard to reconcile.
Does the film talk about the history of Gaza?
It does. There's been a few films that have been made regarding the events of October 7th, but very few. In fact, actually, none of them really deal with the history of Gaza leading up to October 7th and explaining the rise of Hamas and who Hamas is and what their aspirations are. And so we wanted to make sure that our film covered that. We thought that that was extremely important when discussing the events of October 7th. Again, they did not happen. These events did not happen in a vacuum. And so I think it's important that people understand the actual history of that area and really who is Hamas and what are their objectives. If you don't know that, then you really cannot have an honest conversation about what happened on October 7th.
Now, the end of the film ends in hope. Was that important?
Yes, very important. I think it's important to show that really, and we don't say this explicitly, but I think it's important to show that God is faithful to the nation of Israel, that he has promised to preserve them, and that they are a nation that is beloved, firstborn among the nations of God, and that he promises to protect and preserve them throughout the centuries, and that the Israeli people, while many have attempted to wipe the Jewish people and now trying to wipe the nation of Israel off the map, that they are a people who are going to be resilient, they're going to persevere, they're going to stand strong, they're going to come together, and they're going to heal, and they're going to rebuild. And we wanted to make sure that that message was clearly communicated, and I think we accomplished that well with this film.
What is your hope for the film?
Our hope really is, of course, that it would be seen by the masses, because there's so much misinformation, disinformation, lies, blood libels, propaganda, etc., related to Israel and to the events of October 7th. We think it's important that the world sees it. But, we hope that the film is used to change hearts and to help people to be able to empathize more with the people of Israel. Again, I think, if you're going to be a person of compassion for others, it does require empathizing with those that need that compassion. And so this is a way, again, to help people to mourn with those who mourn and to weep with those who weep.
When is the film released?
Our plan right now is a theatrical release in the United States in mid-September. We're still working on finalizing those details. And then sometime thereafter, probably early October, it will be released on streaming platforms worldwide. For those who want to know which platform is available to them, they can just go to the film website, and that information will be available when it becomes available. And so the film website is very easy. It's October7film.com. So October7film.com. And you can connect to just updates regarding the film. You can sign up for film updates. And the trailer is there. In fact, right now we're providing the first 21 minutes of the film is available to watch right now if you want. And so that would be my recommendation, is just to go directly to the film website for information about its release.
There's still hostages in Gaza, and Israel is fighting a new war with Iran, although in some ways it's an old war. What is your prayer for Israel at this time?
Well, my prayer always is for the peace of Jerusalem, and that Israel's enemies would be thwarted, and that Iran, the Islamic regime in Iran, would surrender. And I pray for the Iranian people, the overwhelming majority of which despise the Islamic regime, who would like to see the Islamic regime fall. And so I'm praying that the Islamic regime does fall. Listen, they are the epicenter. They are the axis of the evil within much of the Middle East. They are the ones who've been funding organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, who've been training these terrorists who have declared openly their intent to destroy Israel, in fact, to destroy the West. And so, my prayer is that they would fall and that peace would emerge, and that the hostages, of course, all remaining hostages, dead and alive, would be returned to their families.
Remind us again the website address for people who'd like to see the trailer and get to know more about this film.
October7film.com. October7film.com.
Well, Justin, thank you very much for sharing today.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.